drove away from Ochanomizu. Before leaving, I had asked Natsume to give me some documents on Masaki. First was a copy of his family register and certificate of residence, from where he'd lived up until recently, Nogata Nakano. I also requested records of Tomoyuki Masaki's time in the military. There was likely a roster of his former unit at the first Demobilization Ministry, which has since been restructured as the Ministry of Health and Welfare, First Demobilization Department by the USA Department of the Army. I have to uncover Tomoyuki Masaki's history to unmask this nitwit's true identity. Finally asked for information regarding Naori Kuroya, though I could already tell looking into whether or not that was the nitwit's real name wouldn't be easy. Maybe asking around at his old haunts would turn up some leads. It would have been nice if I knew where he used to work, but he remained tight-lipped on the subject, unfortunately. I drove down Yasukuni Street until I neared my agency, passed under a train overpass, and got into the Ome Highway. My destination was Kichiki Hospital. It was the only haunt of his that came to mind. Interesting. I pulled into the parking lot and quickly found a spot. A four-door Toyopet was parked right next to me. Toyopet? Where have I seen that thing before? Alright, it's Fumiya Kichiki's car, isn't it? Ooh, there you go. He's gonna go up to Fumiya and be like, you know a man by the name of Naori Kuroya? And he's like, that's my cousin. Why are you looking into my cousin? Or he'll be like, do you not know what happened to my cousin? Because I know what happened to my cousin. It was a very bad ordeal. He mentioned he'd bought one of those to get to work after succeeding his father's position, now that I thought about it. Though personally, I thought the other doctors had nicer cars than him, especially taking the former director's Mercedes and a certain criminal psychiatrist's Buick into account. Snap out of it, Reiji. You're a detective, not a vehicle appraiser. At any rate, Fumiya being around meant I could just ask him and get this over with. Hopefully, anyway. In hindsight, though, just because he was the director didn't mean he knew every last patient inside and out. In fact, it'd be crazier if he did. Maybe Oroshiki would be a better bet. Nah, on second thought, I doubt he'd get anything out of him. All he'd be good for was serving as an answer sheet regarding my theories on Masaki's identity. In which case, it would be faster just to check with Masaki himself. Seriously, what the hell am I doing? I should be out there looking for the culprit. I entered the hospital and looked around for familiar faces. Hi, Michiru. That said, this was not the one I'd been hoping for. Unfortunately, she approached despite my wishes.
Nani?
いや、なんでもないよ。山之内先生はいるかな？
誰？
小春ちゃんだよ。
ああ、うん。
どこにいるかな？
後ろ。
I turned around. Kaharu was there, blushing for some reason.
ああ、山之内先生。ちょっとお話が。
はい。
Boy, this is embarrassing.
ここじゃあれですし、どこか他のところで。
合いびき？
You're one letter off. What? Is this a tryst one letter off? What? Wait, how the hell do you spell something wrong aloud? Am I going crazy? What? Is that not how you spell tryst? Or a tryst, however the fuck it's pronounced? I'm pretty sure it's tryst. Where the fuck's my cursor at? Google. Is it spelled with like a Y? Oh, so it is spelled with a Y. I didn't even think twice about it. I thought like I thought it was like another word that she had left off a letter for. Like, it's not a tryst, it's a this, which is like tryst with an extra letter added to it, but no, she just misspelled it. That's okay. That's something to point out, I guess. No, forget it. Anyway, my business wasn't too big of a deal, so I decided to just get it over with right here now.
Masaki 君に関わることなんですが、黒谷直織という名前に心当たりはありませんか？
黒谷さんですか。どこかで聞いたことが。
過去の入院患者などにいませんかね？
それは今は調べようがありませんから。
黒谷は母の旧姓ですよ。
There you go. Fumiya suddenly cut in.
あ、どうも。フミヤさん、母方の姓ですか？
ええ、矢尻の矢ですよね。
ええ。では、黒谷直織という名前も？
直織さんはいとこです。懐かしいな。 戦前に富山へ行った時にしか会ってませんが。
Toyama. Mayhaps in the village of Hitogato. Fumiya massaged his gloved right hand with his left, as if cold or something. Yeah, that is where he got his hand fucked up, isn't it?
それからは会っていらっしゃらない。
ええ、東京に出て医者をやっているという話ですが、あいにくと会う機会には恵まれていません。
医者になっているのは確かですか？
父が会っていますから間違いないでしょう。彼がどうかしたのですか？
いえ。
As I'd hold my tongue, initially I believed Tomoyuki Masaki could have been this Naori Kuroya. I'm still not entirely convinced it isn't, but apparently I was off the mark. I'm not 100% sure of that. I mean, him being Ayato is just as valid as an answer, sure. But I'm still not entirely convinced it's not Naori. There's no way in hell someone on the land would have become a patient at his cousin's hospital. Now, you have a point there. I thought back to Megari Takamiya's request. Well, not impossible that she'd actually come looking for Naori Kuroya. More like that Masaki had written an acquaintance's name instead of his own on the form. And I kind of figured that much as well, too. Like, it's something I was even saying at the beginning of this recording, is that it'd be a very ballsy move for him to put his own name on the missing persons report. One whom the two of them knew. That way, they both could pretend she'd been looking for Naori Kuroya so that they could openly say his name without contradicting one another.
直りさんのことでしたら、奈々子さんがよく知っていますよ。
Yeah, let's meet Nanako.
黒谷医院。あ、直りさんのご実家ですけど、そこで働いていた看護婦さんです。親の都合で東京に出てきて、うちで働いてもらっています。
その方は今いらっしゃいますか？
沢城さんですか？昨日は夜8時から夜勤でしたから朝8時に帰られましたよ。
Oh, had she? Really? Really? She'd been working since 8 last night on the night. Oh, since 8. See, this is where that time of death is going to come into play. She came in at 8 o'clock last night, whereas she was supposed to have met up with Megari at 6, right? It was at 6 o'clock, I believe. So clearly, she meets up with Megari, all that goes down, and she's home by 8. So I'm guessing we're gonna find out that the time of death was somewhere at like 6:30, right? 6:30 or 7. And obviously Reiji and Yukari are gonna be like, well, you know, that's Yukari saw him last at 6:30, 7 o'clock, so he's innocent. But then we're gonna realize, oh, but Nanako didn't go to work till 8 o'clock that night. Mm-hmm.
その沢城さんはMasakiの担当でしたか？
いえ、彼女は主に小児科を担当していましたから接点はなかったと思います。
So the Nanako Soshio that Naori Kuroya knew never met with Tomoyuki Masaki. Not true. Not true. Because like I said, like I noticed, there was that long time no see moment shortly before he tried to, you know, slice. Meaning there was still a chance he and Naori Kuroya were the same person. Yes.
文也さん、その黒谷さんの家はもしかして富山県の人型集落ではありませんか？
ええ、そうです。
Fumiya nodded. There it is. That meant Naori Kuroya and Megari Takamiya hailed from the same village. Finally had my connection, but in that case, just who was Tomoyuki Masaki? It was almost certain he'd originated from Hitogata. But was he Naori Kuroya, or someone else entirely? Brother, I've been trying to figure that out myself this whole time.
沢城さんという方にお話を伺いたいのですが。
明日には出勤すると思いますが。
Tomorrow, I guess I could use that as a last resort if I don't find any other leads.
あと、文也さん、こちらに入院していたMasaki智之に会ったこと。
いえ、ないと思います。その人が直りさんだとしたら、さすがに気づくと思いますし。
Figures. Well, so much for that. They were my big clincher in determining his identity. Right, so if Fumiya never saw him, if Fumiya had seen him, he would have connected the dots immediately, right? But Fumiya never did. Okay. Okay. I was thinking about, because obviously for the longest time he was here as a patient under Rokshiki, and when he was a patient under Rokshiki, obviously Fumiya wasn't running the hospital. He was off doing his own things in the backwoods, fucking his sister. But he still has been a patient of the hospital even after the Rokshiki incident, and Fumiya became the head of the Kichiki hospital. But like we know, Fumiya never actually crossed paths with Masaki. And so, like Reiji saying, it's impossible to completely rule him out at this point. Which, believe me, I am well aware it's impossible to completely rule him out at this point. I've been trying to rule one or the other out. I know he's one or the other, but I just don't fucking know. I suppose I just have to put my brain to work once I got my hands on his family register and all that.
ありがとうございました。また明日伺います。
わかりました。沢城さんには伝えておきますので。
No, don't tell the nurse that the detective is looking for her. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Dusk had arrived by the time I left. At this rate, it'd probably be dark by the time I got to Sakura Damon. I hopped into my car and drove off, hoping the documents would be waiting for me there. I found Natsume in the reek of sweat and smoke that was CID Section 1.
遅いですせ、時坂。
すみません、夏目さん。来てたんですか。
解剖の結果が出ましたさかいな。
では、解剖の報告を聞かせてもらい。
はいな。まずは死亡推定時刻よね。これは
Give or
昨
take a
晩の
half
8
hour's
時頃と
margin
確定
of
しました
error.
ね。前後30分程度の誤差はあると思いますけどな。
So the question being, how long does it take to get from Ochanamizu to the Kichiki Hospital? And that's going to be how we rule out or not Nanako. And it could be entirely possible that Nanako was there and Karen still has involvement, right? And Karen carried it out while Nanako left, or like Nanako started the process and Karen finished it, just so Nanako would have an alibi. Why did I try to pronounce it like that? Jesus, an alibi. But also they're gonna be like 8. Clearly they're about to say, 8 p.m. Well, you said your sister saw him at 7, so it's entirely possible he went back to the hotel. Yeah. All right. So from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. That just left just enough time for Masaki to have committed the crime.
死体にあれだけの加工を施すのにどのくらいかかると思いますか。
せやね。慣れてきとるようやし、30分もあれば十分ちゃいます。完全に亡くなってから作業に入るとも限りまへんけど。
They don't wait for them to actually die before starting their work. True. The time of death was around like 7:30. Was around 8 o'clock, between 7:30 and 8:30. But that's not necessarily when they carried out the crime, right? So she said she probably died from. She said during the crime scene, at the crime scene, that she probably died from blood loss over on the floor where she'd been carved out. But it doesn't. Okay. So it still could be that she finished hanging her up in the closet by like 7:30, and that she could have died or by 8 o'clock. Very. In that case, it was likely assumption that the 30-minute margin of error was spent murdering Megari Takamiya and altering her body. Okay.
それと鑑識から部屋のシャワールームが使われた形跡があるいう報告も来てます。
Oh.
体についた血や匂い
Which
を
would
落
have
としたん
been
でしょう。
clearly extra time after the death.
それだけでしょうね。そこから何か犯人の手がかりが見つかっていたら
ご明察。血液反応だけで髪の毛一本見つかりまへんでしたわ。身長、綺麗好き。
Natsume counted down on her fingers. If the murderer had used the shower, it would have taken even longer for them to leave the room. Around 9 p.m. or so sounded like a safe bet. Okay. And that is the thing. That is the thing, right? Megure said she was waiting for Nanako, but as Masaki left the room, right, he said he saw someone in the lobby that he absolutely did not want to see. The one person he absolutely did not want to see. And I was theorizing it could have potentially been Karen, which would check out. If Nanako... So are they swapping? Are they doing like some back and forth shit? I think that... So is Karen the one actually carrying out the murderers? Which would be interesting, because I wouldn't... Oh, maybe. I feel like that's the way it's gotta... I feel like it's potentially the both of them. Like before I was thinking Karen's the big mastermind, Nanako's the one carrying it out. But now, obviously looking at this case, I feel like both of them could be carrying it out, right? Or Nanako had planned on carrying this one out, but then all of a sudden there was an emergency at the hospital that she had to get called for, and she knew it would be suspicious if she didn't show up, so she calls Karen, lets her know what's going on, and Karen instead carries out this one. This could be potentially the one and only one that Karen has carried out. Things to consider. Naturally, they didn't clear Masaki of suspicion.
夏目さん、他の預かり物を見せてください。
はいな。お役所関係の書類ですな。
I unsealed an envelope Natsume handed me. Within it was a family register and a certificate of residence from Nakano. Tomiyuki Masaki, Nagata, Nakano. One jump. Each jame. Move-in date, April 1948. None of his prior addresses were listed. Same one for his family register. Nagata, Nakano. Each jame. That was what it listed as Tomiyuki Masaki's permanent address. It was the same as his present address. He must have had his family register remade after getting back from the war. That certainly explained why there were no records of his past. Which, needless to say, was a huge problem, considering the fact that that was the biggest piece of the puzzle.
こっちは厚生省から取り寄せた従軍名簿ですな。わざわざ正木藩が乗っ取るとこに付箋挟んでくれてますやん。
見せてください。
I scanned the list Natsume handed me. Tomiyuki Masaki. Found him. According to the documents, he was a resident of Osa village, Chisagata, Nagano, and died of illness while fighting in Luzon.
死人かよ。
Okay, so he took a dead man's name.
まあようある話ですわ。戦地でのうなったお人になり代わって生きとるわね。
That would explain a lot. In other words, the nitwit, knowing Tomiyuki Masaki had died in the war, acquired a new family register under his name after returning from the war, then moved to a city far from the countryside to avoid crossing paths with the real Masaki's friends and family. Certainly wasn't out of the question. After all, people like that weren't uncommon in this day and age, just like Natsume had said.
死んだと思われとってどっこい生きてたいうことも考えられます。
それも否定できませんが。
Yep. Megure Takamiya had come here looking for someone. That someone had likely been the nitwit. Had she been looking for the real Tomiyuki Masaki, he wouldn't have gone out of his way to write Naoto Kuroya's name on the form instead. Took another gander at the roster. Naoto Kuroya's name wasn't there. We all but prove our resident nitwit's identity. It was with that idea in mind that I scanned the names and addresses. Most of these men had been from Nagano. The army had recruited soldiers by region and placed them in the same units, so a lot of them had lived in the same villages. That said, some had come from other regions. And one of them was a resident of Hitogata, Ayato, but his name wasn't Naoto Kuroya. No, it was Hinagami Ayato. Yep. The nitwit was dragged back into the interrogation room come daybreak. I watched all that go down from a peephole in a curtain the next room over.
もう一度最初からおさらいしましょう。
Yaginuma loomed over Masaki in his seat.
おとといの夕刻、あのホテルを訪れたのは、 時間を覚えていますか？
5時半頃ホテルに到着し、
The nitwit sounded totally impassive. Hardly surprised, considering he'd probably been through his line of questioning more times than he cared to count.
確かに5時半。君が被害者と共にホテルを訪れたのは目撃証言が取れています。
それは裏口から出たからで。
なぜわざわざ裏口から出たのです？
Yaginuma turned up the heat. The nitwit didn't answer. Way to make it obvious you're hiding something. Keeping silent wasn't a crime in and of itself. If anything, it was a fundamental right. He could have proven his innocence if he simply told the truth. So then why was he being so stubborn? Well, it formed several theories based on everything I'd learned over the last few days. All that remained was to unmask those truths to one after another.
裏口から出た理由はこう考えられますね。後でもう一度侵入するために鍵を開けておいた。
そんなつもりはありません。
Nitwit shook his head.
ともかく、あなたは一旦宿泊している新宿の探偵事務所に帰った。
ホテルを出て裏側から水道橋の駅まで行って列車に乗りました。
そこで時坂ゆかり嬢と会い会話をした。
7時前です。駅前の2校に寄るようなことを言っている。
それからお茶の水に取って返すことも可能ですよね。
そうですね。
高宮めぐりを殺していないと。
The dumbass hung his head. He wasn't even trying to clear his name. If anything, he looked more guilty than ever before. So if there was something he was still trying to hide, it would have been the reason he left out the back door. The Yaginuma's suggestion that he did so to leave it unlocked for a later return wasn't out of the question. I'd come up with another possibility. He'd seen the real culprit. No, not necessarily the culprit. Maybe he'd seen someone who knew his true identity, in the lobby, and thus fled out the back door to avoid being exposed. If that person had come to visit Meguri Takamiya, that'd make them a mutual acquaintance. I was all but certain by this point that she and this guy who had stolen Tomoyuki Masaki's identity were from the same hometown. Therefore, whoever he'd seen had likely also been from the same place. Though that said, this was still conjecture, and with no solid proof backing it either. The longer this went on, the more evident it appeared that I'd have to reveal his true identity, seeing how he was the key to all this. Meanwhile, Rokshiki had clarified why he'd started going by an alias to begin with. Of course, this was Rokshiki we were talking about, so he might have been screwing with me. But considering how little he'd spoken, that one word had held a lot of weight. I sure as hell hope the fact I believe him over something like that isn't proof the bastard's corrupting me too, though. It was with that in mind I stepped away from the people and entered the interrogation room.
Yo, バカ野郎。
時坂さん。
He looked at me with bags under his eyes. Must not have gotten much sleep.
お前が隠してることが多すぎるせいで捜査が進まねえんだよ。
自分は
Is he still playing dumb? Knowing him, though, he's probably already aware he didn't have me fooled. Looks like it'll be faster to shove the facts straight into his face. Starting with his real name. Let's save. Because, like I said, even I'm not entirely convinced. God damn it. Now, it could be a thing where they give me another chance regardless, where he's like, that's not my name. You're like, oh, well, actually, I knew that. It's actually this, right? But that's the thing. I think that final piece of evidence that Reiji found is probably the nail in the coffin of who it is. Because Naori wasn't in a unit with Masaki. Ayato was. So the only one who would know Masaki's name and know that they could take that name would be Ayato.
Hinagami Ayato.
And it would gasp for a moment.
Masaki Tomoyuki は南方戦線で戦死している。その部隊にいた唯一の人型集落出身者。それがhinagami Ayato だ。
そういう人もいましたね。
Oh, you are so full of shit.
戦没者名簿というのはなかなか面倒でね。大抵は遺族が抹消するのだが、身寄りがない場合にはそのままになっていることもある。
Spread the roster across the
も
desk.
ちろん実は生きていましたと言って戻ってくることだって可能だ。
なぜです？
君は知っているだろう。彼は病死だ。赤痢かマラリアか知らないが、
People like him were treated differently from those who'd gone MIA in battle and were consequently declared KIA.
そして高宮めぐりと同郷の人間。今まで得た情報から考えればこいつしか該当しないよ。
Masaki, no. Ayato Hinagami said nothing. No one was going to have to reveal the trauma that haunted him, but he was so obsessed with keeping secret to get him to spill his guts, even though that'd mean getting a little aggressive.
名前を変えた理由は至極単純だろう。戦後10年近くその名前で過ごしていた。
He still didn't budge an inch. Oh shit. I was hoping I wouldn't have to say this in the middle of a police station. He's not giving much of a choice here. Hiroshiki better not have been screwing with me.
まさき。いや、ひながみあやと。
Murder.
単純に考えれば殺人だろうな。復員後どこかで人を殺め、名前を変えて東京で潜伏していた。
何か証拠があるんですか？
証拠なんかないさ。ただ君がかかっていた精神科医の話から推測したまでだよ。
Much as I hated to admit
お
it.
そらく故郷で殺人を犯したのだろう。終戦直後ならば他に行く場所なんてそうないだろうからね。
先輩、推測が多すぎるんじゃないですか？
逮捕しようなどとは思っていないよ。ただ俺は事実を知りたいだけさ。なあ、まさき。いや、ひながみあやとくん。
何も話すことはありませんよ。
証人を呼べば話してくれるのか？黒谷直織、看護婦の沢城奈々子、あとはひながみカレン。君と同じ姓だな。
いつの間にそこまで調べたんですか？
偶然の産物は多いがね。
Decide.
何か
From the top, buddy boy.
そうだな。君が隠していることから話してくれればいい。
しばらく一緒にいましたけど、時坂さん。
Hell yeah.
その程度のことは自覚しているさ。
Believe me, I'm aware.
だったら僕に探偵は務まりそうにあります。
自分のことを性格がいいなんて言えるんだったら資格は十分さ。
かもしれませんね。話しますよ。
Masaki, no. Ayato Hinagami looked to the ceiling, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Yes. Garniche 4, Sloth.
さつきが死んだ。集落ではしばらくの間警察の調査があったが、僕が何かを知ることは一切なかった。何もわからぬまま捜査は打ち切られ、さつきは隠れヒンナの一角に葬られた。僕は何もする気が起きず、ただいたずらに時を過ごしていた。お国のためだとか、そんな偉いことを考えていたわけではない。教育を受けた後、僕はすぐに大陸に送られた。そこからマレー、ジャワ、スマトラと前線を渡り歩いた。その中で学んだこと、人は簡単に死ぬということ。ちっぽけな銃弾一つ、時には単純な罠ですぐ隣を行軍していた人間の頭がザクロのように弾けたこともある。足を打たれ動けなくなったものを見捨てたこともある。綺麗事なんて何も通じない世界だった。出会った敵を確実に殺さねば生き残れない世界だった。僕は完全に感覚が麻痺していた。人が死ぬことに慣れてしまっていた。そのうちサツキの死の事実にも慣れてしまうと思っていた。しかし彼女は
Well, yeah, that.
僕が眠りに
To
つ
be
く
fair, that's not one that would really be easy to get over. That's not just like some easily explained away death, right?
サツキは僕の夢の中で
Satsuki got like fully fucking dismembered and then like suspended from ropes in front of like the Tori gate, right? Like That's not quite the same. Like, yeah, no, watching your comrade in arms get his head blown off, that's traumatic to be sure, but like, that's an easily explained away thing. That's like, yep, we're at war, people's heads get fucking blown off. It happens. How did he die? Big bullet to the fucking brain. Whereas like Satsuki, of course that one's gonna fucking haunt your dreams, because not only did you have like a very close relationship with her, but there was just such a strange way to die. That's not easily explained away.
ありとあらゆる死に方で死んでいた。僕が戦争で見た死体が全てサツキに置き換わって再生された。フィリピンの密林で保証に立った夜、僕は隣にいた同僚に夢を見ることはあるかと尋ねた。彼も夢に殺した敵兵が現れると言った。しかし飯をたらふく食った夜には出てこないと笑っていた。密林の中では糧食も少なく、補給船が断たれることもしばしばあった。先端を開く前に多くの同僚が飢えによって死んでいた。僕は彼とよく話をした。長野の田舎のことを。僕も田舎育ちなので共感することも多かった。そんな彼も戦地で病に倒れた。マラリアの高熱に侵されたが薬はなかった。彼は他の死者と同様現地で葬られた。遺品と呼べるものは何もなく、渡すべき人もいなかった。年が明け、米軍が島に上陸を始めた。僕らは空爆と戦車の砲撃に怯えながら交戦した。連中は山奥にまでブルで道を作り進行してきた。飢えで苦しんでいた僕らに抗う術はなかった。次々と仲間が倒れ、気づけば部隊で生き残っているのは僕一人になっていた。別の部隊に組み込まれた後も戦闘は続き、やがて
Incorporated into another unit. Now the question is, who was in that other unit? I still don't think my theory of, one of the boys killing the other is too far off. Like, so we do know, so we heard from Fumiya, right, that his father had told him that Naori was working as a doctor in Tokyo or somewhere, right? He was working as a doctor. But it's not too far-fetched to assume that Fumiya's dad could have been lying to him, alright? It was very clear that Fumiya's dad held a lot of contempt for his son, especially after finding out that he fucked his sister, which totally understandable. So I don't know for sure if Naori's still alive. Because that's the thing, we did mention Naori's name, and we were like, oh, we could bring in some suspects to confirm your identity, such as Naori, Nanako, Karen. And clearly he wasn't going to be like, oh, well, couldn't bring in Naori, he's dead. Because he already knew he was fucked, because if he knows that Nanako and Karen are alive, so clearly there was no point in saying, oh, go ahead, bring in Naori, if you could find him, stupid. It would also make a lot of sense if he knows Naori's dead, right? Because then that's why he would write that name on the missing persons report. So that if by some means Reiji ended up did end up looking into Naori, he wouldn't find anything. Because Naori died in the war. And then that could just be case closed, right? Eventually Reiji would come to that conclusion, oh, he died in the war. Well, sorry, ma'am. We looked into your missing persons report. He's dead.
僕の運が良かったのは、停戦命令が発された際、比較的本体に近い場所にいたことだろう。終戦後、無駄に命を散らすことなく、そう。僕は生き残ったのを運がいいと思っていたのだ。それに気づいたのは、福音列車で富山に向かっている時だった。 僕は何の疑問も持たず故郷に帰ろうとしていたのだ。サツキが生かしてくれたのだと思った。サツキの無念を晴らすために僕をもう一度人型の集落へ呼び戻したのだと。
And Reiji had theorized that Ayato had killed someone from his hometown. And that still could be Naori. Maybe it had nothing to do with the war. True. So I think that was one of my very first theories before I ever considered Naori as a possibility of Masaki's identity, when I was fully gung-ho that it was 100% Ayato, which clearly I was right, but that was one of my theories, right? That he had learned who was truly responsible for Satsuki's death, like the truth behind what had happened, and that led to him, you know, killing someone and going on the lam. So I think my original theory was closer than any other one I could have come up with.
表ヒンナの懐かしい景色を眺め、僕はサツキを殺したやつを見つけ出す決意をした。
Oh, flashback? Are we going to a flashback? Alright, alright. Ayato boarded a wood gas bus at the train station on the foot of the mountain and rode it all the way to Hitogata. He was the sole passenger. Ayato disembarked to find his hometown blanketed in snow. He did say that the eldest sons were exempt from the draft, right? Which Naori, being the only son of Yuzuru, meant that Naori would have been exempt. Okay. And clearly, even though Naori was in some way, you know, close to Satsuki, he clearly wouldn't be as shaken by it as Ayato would have been, right? Okay. Okay. So Naori stayed in the village the whole time is, you know, the final point. Feels like I've been whisked back to that winter. On his way over, he saw that Toyama City had been ravaged by air raids, turning into a twisted hellscape appropriation of its former glory. This place, on the other hand, hadn't changed one bit. So much so they would have thought there had never been any war at all had he not known any better.
Ayato-sama!
Yuka? Ayato's ears echoed with a familiar voice he hadn't heard in years.
ユカさん、
お帰りなさいませ綾人様。
Yuka bowed, her voice choked with tears.
ただいま。
Ayato's family maid looked like she'd barely aged a day since he last saw her all those years ago. Yeah, how convenient for the artists, right? A facet that only served to heighten the illusion that Hitogata had been separated from the rest of the world.
お嬢様がこちらでお待ちです。
Yuka took the dirty knapsack Ayato was carrying and led him into the town hall's branch office. A kindling stove sat on the dirt floor. Karen was warming up in a chair right by the fire. She rose to her feet upon seeing Ayato.
兄様。
ただいま、カレン。大きくなったな。
Karen hugged her brother for dear life, her body racked with sobs.
兄様。兄様。よくそご無事で。
She gripped his filthy uniform and wept into it. Ayato couldn't very well tell her she'd get herself dirty. He was just surprised there was someone who'd be so glad to see him return alive.
にしてもよう帰ってこれたな。まだ大陸から戻ってこれん連中もおるんじゃろ。
Saizo called out from his post.
僕はただ運が良かっただけ。
にしてもこっからただ一人戦争に行ったお前さんがきちんと帰ってくるとはの。
Okay, so Ayato was the only one
ヒ
from
ン
the
ナ様の
village.
ご加護でもあったんかの。
Interesting. A vengeful god kept me safe. That's rich. Lord Hina had played no part in Ayato's survival. He really had just been lucky. Nothing more, nothing less.
お家に帰りましょう。兄さん。
あ
私、先に戻ってお風呂の用意をしてまいります。
Yuka bowed and exited the branch office.
私たちもね。疲れているでしょうが、もう少しですから。
And with that, Karen escorted Ayato out of the building. She was a total chatterbox on the way home. She talked about how their father was too busy to come home these days since he was stuck providing massive amounts of medicine now that the war was over. About how Naore was attending college in Tokyo. About how Mia and Kensei's daughter was growing up. Mia and Kensei's daughter? Huh. And also about how Karen herself would start working at Hinagami Pharmaceuticals next spring. But apart from all those, Hitagata hadn't changed a bit. Oh, what the fuck was her name? Tokiko? Is that who Mia and Kensei's daughter is? Tokiko? Shigusa Tokiko? Wasn't that her name? From Cartagra? Is that their way of like alluding to it without actually saying her name? Because we don't, I believe her name was Tokiko, right? It's not Toko because that was the two girls from the first game. What the fuck was I can't access the notes. Or at least very little. Wait, I didn't read the previous line. But apart from all those, Hitagata hadn't changed a bit, or at least very little. Okay. I'm guessing that's her name was Tokiko, right? I'm trying to remember what's the new girl's name? Yukiko, right? Yukiko. That's the new girl's name who looks eerily similar to Toko. But then Shigusa Tokiko was the maiden from Cartagra. Pretty sure. Been several years since Ayato had left his hometown to join the army. Yet here, it almost felt like no time had passed. Still remembered Satsuki's death as if it were only yesterday. Suddenly Ayato stopped. The stone staircase to Shigusa's shrine spanned before him. He stood absolutely still, nearly convinced Satsuki would show up at any second.
Nisama?
Karen stared at his face. He knew he'd never see Satsuki again. Not as anything more than a revenant, anyway. Unless I'm right and there was a body double. Ayato kneeled on the floor and bowed to the head of the table. It was his grandfather's voice that greeted him. Just like that, Hideyomi got up and left the living room as though it were merely another day. He'd been away for as long as Ayato could remember. He'd been that way. The strict head of the family never parted with his augustness. What the fuck does augustness mean? Augustness? No, I don't want no AI overview. Dignified bearing or appearance befitting someone of royal status. Okay. I'm guessing that's something that goes back to like Augustus, Caesar? Roman dude, I think. Alright, whatever. Thus it was instead his wife, Mariko, who came over to Ayato.
Ayato-san, まずは着替えてくつろぎなさい。
わかりました。
Ayato rose up off the floor and bowed. The old him would likely never have acted so formally. Yet now he was staying on ceremony with her, the product of years of superior officers drilling discipline into him during his service. Perhaps that was for the best.
兄様、こちらへ。
Karen brought Ayato back to his old room with a change of clothes for him in hand. And changed a bit either. The place was exactly as Ayato had left it all those years ago.
お召し物を脱いでください。洗濯をしますから。
I'm not gonna get naked for you, nasty.
いや、捨ててくれ。ずっと着ていたから洗っても無駄だろうし。
He knew no amount of cleaning would ever get the stench of blood and mud off them.
わかりました。
Karen set Ayato's change of clothes down and circled behind him. She then undid his front buttons and grabbed his collar before removing his uniform.
大丈夫ですか？
Karen gasped when she saw Ayato's skin littered in discolored bandages.
兄様、これは？
I went to war, sis. I don't know if you know this, but war's kind of brutal. You don't come out fucking without bruises and scars.
見ての通り、傷だよ。
What happened to you? I was on the battlefield. They served as reminders of the terrors he'd faced on the battlefield. However, it wasn't the enemy bullets that had scarred him. No, they were from jungle insects, sharp branches, and polluted water. All those had left marks that would follow him to the grave.
痛くはないのですか？
No shit.
感覚が麻痺しているのかな。痛みはあまり感じないよ。
お風呂よりも早く病院へ行かれた方がよろしいのではありませんか？
ああ、そうか。このまま風呂に入ったら湯船が汚れてしまうな。
そんなことを気にしているのではありません。
Karen shook her head. I hadn't gotten any adequate medical treatment on the battlefield. Honestly, it was practically a godsend he hadn't gotten sick or lost any limbs despite that. No, not a godsend. Luck. Just like everything else. That's all there was to it.
まずはこれに着替えて、それからクレアインへ行きましょう。
Naito threw an undershirt over his dirty bandages and donned a coat. His new clothes smelled rather bizarre. Rather, it was his uniform that had been the anomaly. He was simply overwhelmed by the missing stench of blood, mud, and sweat.